And welcome back to another episode of the Double Doink Podcast. My name is Brendan Deek. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. It would be greatly appreciated. You can also rate the podcast and review the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. It would also be greatly appreciated. We are talking strictly Chicago Bears on today's episode, and I am very happy to be joined by Jacob Infante, writers for the Chicago Bears for SB Nation. Jacob, a man. How are we doing?
Doing good, doing good. I mean, it's one of these times in the NFL offseason where it's like really, kind of low key. There's not really too much going on, but if anything, that just makes it more fun to speculate and to look into the future and to keeping that forward thinking mindset. So I got to get creative to find some stuff to talk about, but that's a challenge and I enjoy it. So I appreciate you having me on.
No, man. Thanks for taking the time. I kind of want to start with you before we get into it. Tell me a little about yourself. Are you born and raised in Chicago? Is that how you kind of got into this whole being a Chicago sports fan?
Yeah. So I've been in the Chicago area my whole life. I've grown up within 45 minutes to an hour of Chicago. My entire life. I'm gonna be a fourth generation season ticket holder from my great grandpa from back when the Bears were at Wrigley Field. And that's trickled down through my family, over the years. My dad was a huge part in getting me into just the Bears fandom in general. I was because he went to the 1985 the Super Bowl that they ended up winning, Super Bowl 20 with I think it was my grandpa, my uncle, and one of their friends. So it's been in the family for quite a long time. I didn't really have too much of a choice in the matter. I was, basically guaranteed to grow up a Bears fan, and I've just embraced it from a young age. And over the course of, growing up and over the years, I've enjoyed having the chance to talk about football through, writing, podcasting, whatever. And yeah, it's basically how I got to this Bears fandom that I'm at right now. It's been definitely some ups and downs with how the Bears have been in recent years, but I wouldn't change that for anything. It's a part of who I am, so I'm very grateful to have been brought up in that football heavy support system, I guess.
So are you a White Sox? Or you're a Cubs guy, I guess, and actually, right? You said Wrigley Field. You have season tickets there.
Yeah, no. So I am actually a White Sox fan.
Gotcha.
I'm not a die-hard baseball fan to the point where I love the White Sox, hate the Cubs. I am a White Sox fan. I really like the White Sox, but I don't hate the Cubs. Truthfully, I was rooting for them in their 2016 World Series. So no bad blood really. It's just a matter of if I had to choose between them, it's the White Sox. So but football is definitely the bigger sport of the two. And, I follow basketball a decent amount. Don't know a ton about hockey, but, football is my first love. But, yeah, White Sox fan for sure.
So where were you when the double doink happened? Give me your emotions.
Oh,
It's a double doink podcast, Jacob. We got to talk.
I know. I figured something was going to come about that. But, yeah, no. So I was actually at the game. And
okay.
I was there live at Soldier Field, and it was an interesting game. I mean, it was pretty close the entire time. The offense was really stalling early on, and the fact that they didn't have Eddie Jackson on the defense back when he was playing at his All-Pro level, that was definitely tough for the secondary. But I remember the Bears were having a good offensive drive. Trubisky had a really good deep throw to Allen Robinson, be able to get into field goal range. I thought 43 yards. I mean, Cody Parkey, struggled over the course of the year, so I wasn't going to say, all right, this is, definitely going in. We're moving on to the next round. And I admittedly couldn't tell if it went in or not from the first, from my angle, because I was in the south end zone on the southwest side, and it was in the north end zone where the field goal was.
Gotcha.
And so you can't really see too well with field goals just because there's no it's tougher to see, much tougher to see in person, especially when you're watching along the side.
Even
like
on
that.
TV, I didn't even know what happened for like a couple seconds
Oh
after.
no!
So, yeah, like it kind of happened so fast, and it took like a second. It almost, I feel like when the mascot fell over, I kind of realized something bad happened for the Bears. Like the mascot
Yeah,
kind of did the status celebration, so I think that's what kind of triggered it in my head.
yeah, no, absolutely. And there was like a couple seconds where I paused and I'm like, wait, did it go in? I have no idea, because everyone in the crowd was just kind of stunned and confused. They didn't know exactly what was going on. And then after like a few seconds, the booze just started pouring. I don't get to the point where I get furious about, sports, just because done a, I like to think I've done a decent enough job of removing myself from that full extent of the emotional, but I was admittedly pretty furious, and people were chanting things outside coming out of the stadium. They were shouting things, and definitely not, safe for work. What some of the stuff that they were saying, but yeah, it was. I mean, the atmosphere itself was really fun in the game itself, leading up to the double doink, but and that's something I'll never forget. Just the energy that was in the stadium, right before kickoff, and when the Bears were on defense and the Eagles would have like a third down opportunity. It was something I've never experienced before, but I'm glad I went, even if it means that I get to tell the story that I saw the double doink live.
Yeah.
It's it's still
I
tough.
feel like I just brought up all these demons inside your body right now.
Yeah, I'm just ranting on and on.
Yeah.
This is my
No, man.
football
Go for this.
therapy.
Is a safe place. This is a safe place.
Yeah.
What I always so somewhat co-host. He's taking a step back on our show here. Who's one of my best friends. He's a diehard Bears fan. Okay, so that's why it's called the Double Dunk Podcast, and I always bug him about it. We always talk about that playoff run's very funny because Eagles go on to the next round and play the Saints, and they get heartbroken, right? You have the Alshon Jeffrey draw.
Yeah.
My heart gets shattered the next week. And then the Saints go on to play the Rams, and that was the no pass interference penalty.
Yeah.
So it's like whoever won in that round was getting their heart broken the next week. It was just like a train reaction. The Bears fans got their heart broken, Eagles fans got their heart broken, and the Saints fans got their heart broken, and then the Rams obviously lose to the Super Bowl, right? Like that NFC kind of crowd, those teams, like every single fan base kind of felt it during that playoff run. So I always find that year very funny from the NFC side of things. And one last thing, just on that game, I always do remember that game as Jason Peters absolutely shutting down Khalil Mack. That was kind of like the game in itself, right? Khalil Mack had that unbelievable year. And that was Jason Peters' kind of last hoorah in Philly. Like he never was the same after that. So I always kind of look back to that game. But all right, why don't we kind of talk about some present Chicago Bears? And I want to start with the Chicago Bears draft class. So Jacob, before we kind of get into just players in general, why don't we kind of just zoom out, look at it big, just kind of all the players clustered into one. What did you make of what Ryan Poles' first NFL draft was, and what did you just make of the haul that he got?
I thought it was pretty solid. I think that in the grand scheme of things, the offense still has plenty of needs. I mean, if I were in charge, I would have taken an offensive player with one of the first two picks, but I'm certainly not complaining with what they got. I think that they needed help in the secondary. I think Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker are two day one starters. I think of, high ceilings and high floors, just, very good football players. I thought Brisker in particular was really good value at 48. I was really impressed with that selection. And Velus Jones Jr., I don't think he's going to be much more than a complimentary piece, but complimentary pieces have plenty of value, especially in today's NFL, with someone with his skill set, someone who can, you can use him on screens, you can use him out of the backfield, you can use him on, deep routes, stretching the field. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use him inside, outside, what have you. And then the fact that Ryan Poles traded back repeatedly in rounds 5 and 6, I was a fan of, just because this is a team that needed an overhaul. Ryan Poles wanted to change the dynamic, change the culture in the locker room, on the field. And what better way to do that than to stock up on as many picks as possible and to have as many guys in there as you possibly can. I think the fact that they drafted 4 offensive linemen this year, statistically, I feel like one of them kind of has to develop into a starter.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
Darts to
chance.
the dartboard, right? One of them's gonna hit, right?
Yeah,
Darts to the dartboard.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know exactly who that's going to be, and I don't know if one guy's going to be a starter, two guys, whatever. None of them could develop into a starter in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's important the offensive line for Poles to be able to shape that, because him having an offensive line background, I think he knows that's his position. So I do trust him in that regard. I like the offensive line picks he made. Dominique Robinson, the edge rusher for Miami of Ohio, I think was a high upside athletic edge rusher, and they got some solid depth in the way of running back Treston Ebner. They got Trenton Gill, who I think is going to step in and be the punter for these guys going forward. And then, Elijah Hicks, the Cal safety, I think is going to compete for a roster spot and play on special teams. So considering the fact you don't have a first round pick, you don't have a third round pick, it's going to be tougher to, secure those sort of but not a third round pick, a fourth round pick, excuse me. You don't have a first round pick, you don't have a fourth round pick. It might be tougher to find some day one talent, but I think the Bears did as good of a job as they possibly could have, given their, just their general position. And I think that I'm interested in seeing what happens this next year. If, I think they're going to go more offensive heavy because they gifted Eberflus with some guys to really build around in his defense and his image, being a defensive minded head coach. But I think next year is going to be more offense. I think that's when we're going to see receivers. We might see another offensive lineman or something. I'm just genuinely interested in seeing what happens, because I think that it's going to be a long process, but I do think that this draft was a good start for them.
Are Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker going to start day one? Like, are there spots open for them to kind of just walk in and play day one?
I think so. I think Kyler Gordon's definitely going to start right away.
Okay.
When you consider that, at least for an outside cornerback, you're looking at his competitions. Kendall Vilder was starting there most of the year. He didn't play very well, at least, well enough to keep a starting job. Thomas Graham Jr. shown some promise. I don't know if the plan for this current regime is to have him more outside or have him kick in the nickel. I'd kick him in the nickel to have him compete with Tavon Young there inside. And then Duke Shelley has slot experience, has outside experience. I don't think there's a true threatening presence on this roster right now that will stop Kyler Gordon from starting outside alongside Jalen Johnson. And Jaquan Brisker, I think, does face a little bit more competition. I think Dane Cruikshank is an underrated safety in the grand scheme of things. I think that he got, lost in the shuffle a little bit with that loaded Titans secondary. I think he's a more than capable safety. I think he's still going to play a decent amount, whether that's as a starter or in sub packages and heavy nickel, heavy dime looks. And DeAndre Houston Carson's also a talented defender, makes his money on special teams, but when he stepped in on the back end, he's been pretty good. But I think Brisker's the most talented of those three. I think that you're looking at someone with legit 3-down value, someone who can drop back into coverage, who's athletic, who's, loose hips, can cover a big amount of the field, someone who can charge downhill, defend the run, he's not afraid to lower the shoulder and deliver a hard hit. So I think he's a very good complement alongside Eddie Jackson. I think the Bears will be wise to take advantage of that as quickly as possible. So I think the two defensive backs are going to start day one.
Yeah, I like what you said before. They kind of gifted Eberflus, kind of his guys right out the gate, and I actually do think that is something that did happen here. Like he was coming from Indianapolis Colts system where he was the defensive back coach guy. Like this was kind of his specialty, right? So kind of getting two guys like that to kind of step in day one maybe just helps him right off the bat. And I don't think the board really fell their way. Like if they wanted to kind of maybe go get offensive guys, like I do think George Pickens maybe is a guy that you're kind of maybe kicking yourself down the road. If he was there, like that's one of the only players I can see that Bears fans are kind of sitting there going, okay, we should have taken this guy. But he had some red flags. He had some off-field issues. He had some on-field issues as well. Like, I think I think there was a part where he squirted a water bottle on like the opposing team's sidelines. Yeah. That in college. So like, I can understand why Bears brass didn't want to maybe put their name on this guy right out the gate. So I do understand that. So yeah, you know what? In the grand scheme of things, I do think the first two picks are fine. I do want to talk about the third round pick, which I'll I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Velus Jones Jr. What do you make of drafting a 25-year-old wide receiver in the third round when there was kind of some other options there?
So I personally, for full disclosure, I had a 4th round grade on Velus Jones Jr.
Yeah.
So I think, part of that did factor in his age, his being older for his position. So from a pure talent perspective, I guess you could make that argument. Age, it doesn't concern me too much, but it is something to keep in mind. Like, if he's solid, then yeah, you'll be able to extend him, but by the time he hits free agency, is going to be 29. Is that someone you're going to be willing to give a long-term deal to? Is that someone you're going to be willing to pay big money for when most of his prime is going to be played on the rookie years, which could be looked at as a positive, but down the line, there's potential you're not getting as many years out of him. So I did think that was a little bit of a reach. I think he's a very good scheme fit, so I do understand from that perspective. I think that, looking at Luke Getsy, he comes from a Matt LaFleur, Kyle Shanahan, that tree of coaches and that tree of schemes. Looking at what the 49ers have been able to do with Deebo Samuel, the Dolphins, I think we're going to see a lot of them with Mike McDaniel there, a lot of how they'll use Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I think you'll see a decent amount of that. So I think Velus Jones, maybe not as productive as a Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, or Jalen Waddle, but he'll fill a similar role in that I think manufactured touches are going to be the key for him in a way that some receivers probably wouldn't have been able to do. So if you're looking for a pure technician, if you're looking for someone who can go up and grab the 50-50 ball, there are certainly better choices than Velus Jones Jr., but I think that as a high-end gadget player, a decent complimentary guy, I think it's a decent enough selection. I think you were right, and I really wanted George Pickens in round 2. Even with the concerns, that's not for me to totally decide on because I'm not in there talking with him. I'm not in there talking to his coaches, and but I just know from an on-the-field perspective, he was really good. But yeah, Velus Jones, I think, is a solid player. I don't think he's going to be elite. I don't think he's going to be necessarily great, but I think he can be good. I think he can be good. And when the Bears are in the situation they're in offensively, just having someone you can get the ball to, different positions, but kind of similar to Tariq Cohen in 2017. I mean, that offense was not very good, didn't have a lot of weapons. This Bears offense is certainly in a better position than that 2017 offense where, Kendall Wright was the number 1 wide receiver on that roster. But still, you don't have a ton of great talent there. Velus, I think, can fit that kind of Cohen mold where you manufacture touches to a guy who's fast and athletic and can play in a lot of different positions. So that's what I think the role is going to be for him.
Yeah, I'm kind of like a sucker for wide receivers coming out of the draft. That's kind of where I focus a lot on. They're the most fun to watch, right? Most fun tape. Yeah, I love falling in love with the wide receiver position. He was a funny watch. You saw the juice come off when he got the ball in his hand. Like you saw it there. It's just I'm kind of an ageist as well when it comes to the draft. If you've been following my work, you know that. I'm not a fan of drafting guys over 24 years old. In the third round, I guess it's fine. Yeah. But he was a weird watch. Like I feel like there's a lot left to be known about him, if that makes sense. Like I feel like when he gets to the NFL, like I want to say he finished 3rd or 4th in yards after the catch in the SEC or something like that. So he's got enough juice where when the ball's in his hands, he can kind of make things pop. But I do, if I'm a Bears fan, and this is coming from an outsider, I am a tad underwhelmed with just the amount of Justin Fields help, I guess, that they got him in the draft.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely a concern. Mm-hmm. I think that, at least in my opinion, the Bears are going to be treating this as Justin Fields' true rookie season. You didn't necessarily get the most out of him in year 1. Not a great offense, not a great system. Just a lot of confusion there in general. I think that the scheme will be better. I mean, you can make the argument the weapons aren't as good, going from Allen Robinson to Byron Pringle. But
free agent signing Byron Pringle. Is that the most money they gave out for agency? Was the Byron Pringle?
Either that or it was Justin Jones, the defensive lineman. I don't know off the top of my head which it is. It's one of the two, though. So either way, I think Pringle's a decent wide receiver 3, but they don't have a true wide receiver 2 on this roster. So I'll be interested. I'll be interested. Yeah, I'll be I'll be interested in seeing how that turns out. I mean, you can make the argument, Darnell Mooney's the wide receiver 2, and then like you said, you need the wide receiver 1.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
It's funny, like I'm doing rankings for FTN Network. Like I'm doing like positional rankings, and I'm going to be doing wide receiver soon. I was looking at the Bears wide receiver depth chart, and it's not the prettiest sight in the world. I'll be honest. It's not a lot to work with there. But I want to zoom out here, Jacob, and kind of just talk big picture a little bit here. So, what was your initial reaction when they hired Matt Eberflus? Did you like it? Did you not like it? And what is like the last couple months maybe kind of take it to your opinion on the hiring?
So I'll admit I've warmed up to it a little bit more. Really, that's the case with, I think, a lot of the things the Bears do. I get myself in the cycle where something happens, if I'm lukewarm on it or I'm not a big fan of it, eventually I start to talk myself into it, or maybe it's just, the irrational, emotional part of me kicking in firsthand, and then the logical settling in eventually. But I was all right with Eberflus. I thought that when you considered that it was him, Jim Caldwell, or Dan Quinn, Eberflus was the guy I wanted the most out of those 3. I would have rather gone with an up-and-coming offensive coach. Like, I liked Brian Dable a good amount. I liked Byron Leftwich. He ended up staying in Tampa Bay. But I still think that, someone in that vein, maybe even a Kellen Moore, I don't know. I like some of those more offensive, young-minded guys, but you can make the argument they did that with Matt Nagy and it didn't work out. So Eberflus, I think, is a very good defensive coach. I think he's a good leader. I think he's a guy that people buy into. I think he's going to be good for the culture, just kind of, resetting things in the mold that Ryan Poles wants. I think, you're looking at speed and physicality. I think that shows up. That showed up on the Chiefs roster, that showed up on the Colts roster, and the defense especially, where Eberflus, is able to take control. So I'm expecting to see a bit of that on Chicago's roster to start this year. I mean, and next year I think you'll see it even more so, but this year I think you'll start to see some flashes. And look, I don't think this team's going to finish with a great record or anything, but I think that they're going to fight. I think they're going to be closer in some games than people, might expect them to be. And I think a lot of that's just going to come down to coaching. A lot of that's just going to come down to just the mentality that's going to be in the locker room this year.
I'm going to throw a statement your way. You can either take it and love it. You can throw it back at me and tell me I'm an idiot. But this is kind of what I'm maybe seeing a little bit from this organization. So they've hit the reset button. They fired the GM. They fired that coach. They brought in a new system, new GM, new head coach, everything. Is there something to it that this is not their quarterback? That Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, this is not their guy. So they don't really care. Not care, maybe not be the right word, but they don't really need to win with Justin Fields, if that makes sense. Like Justin Fields, their hat isn't hung on Justin Fields. If he doesn't succeed, that's not our guy. We didn't draft him. He was here when we got here. Is there something to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I don't think so. I mean, granted, I think that there's been some speculation and some discussion which points to something, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think Eberflus or Poles would have taken this job if they didn't think Justin Fields could be the guy. And it's not a situation like with the Cardinals where Josh Rosen was, really, really bad, and the Cardinals had the first overall pick, and Kyler Murray, a guy that Cliff Kingsbury notably loved, was available there. So it's not like the Bears had that opportunity, but I think that Justin Fields definitely showed flashes as a rookie.
Oh yeah.
Certainly a work in progress. I won't deny that, but I think that just in general, I don't think that it's fair to Fields to judge off of 1 year in a bad offensive
100%,
system.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think that they're going to be willing to play the long game with him. I think that not this year, but next year especially is going to be the big it's going to be a big calling card, and it's going to be able to determine, all right, is Fields the guy? I think he can be. I still have the hope and the belief, from what I saw from him this year, what I, saw from him at Ohio State. I think he can be a franchise quarterback in this league. time will tell if he's able to develop and he's able to improve in, a handful of regards. I mean, by all accounts, he's, quickened his release time, his throwing motions more compact, and that was a weakness of his over the last few years. So I'm interested in seeing if that shows up in game instead of just in practice too. But I still believe that Fields can be the guy for the Bears, and I think that Eberflus and Poles, maybe if they're not entirely on board saying this guy's definitely going to be a star, I think that they still at least have hope that he can develop into one.
Yeah, I meant it more from like there's no rush for this management team or coaching staff to get him help or to make him succeed, if that makes sense. Like they're not coming in here like, oh my God, Justin Fields is on the rookie contract. We have to help him out now. We have to get him all these players, because they're clearly not acting that way. If you take a look around the league and look at all the young quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, for instance, like I'm an Eagles guy, right? Like they've done everything possible to help their young quarterback succeed. Trevor Lawrence, as much as we don't have to agree with what Jacksonville's doing, they're at least trying. They spent a stupid amount of money in free agency to put wide receivers, like mediocre wide receivers around him. At least, like, again, they're trying to help them there. The San Francisco 49ers have Deebo Samuel for Trey Lance. Well, who knows if he stays there. But I feel like more of the fact is this management system, this coaching staff isn't like fully motivated to say we have to have Justin Fields succeed or else we're out of here, because their argument is, look, he was here when we got here. We don't need to kind of help him out. Okay, a couple more questions for you. What do you make of the offseason that Ryan Poles has done? Because I was looking at cap spending the other day, and the Chicago Bears have only $168 million in cap spending this year compared to the Washington Commanders of $233 million. The Bears are spending almost more than $70 million less than the top team. So they're basic, like, this is a punt year. Like, did they know that the books aren't aligned up for them to succeed this year? This team had a lot of issues heading into this year. Like Ryan Pace did not leave these books very pleasantly, if that makes sense. Like Brian Poles had a lot to do, had a lot to fix. But what do you make, I guess, of the job that for the first year GM Ryan Poles has done so far?
Yeah, so at first I wasn't really a fan. I understand the vision. I think that I came into this offseason where, all right, you want to be able to surround Justin Fields with talent, just because I'm used to that as a Bears fan. That's what the Bears did with Trubisky. Coming into his second year, they gave him Allen Robinson, Taylor Gabriel, Anthony Miller, Trey Burton. They added all those guys to the offense. And, even Jay Cutler, it took him a little while, but eventually, while he was there, after they traded for him, they brought in Brandon Marshall. They brought in Alshon Jeffrey. They brought in Martellus Bennett. So I think that you definitely, you mentioned Ryan Pace leaving the cupboard a little bit bare. There are a handful of bad contracts. There are not a whole lot of draft capital and plenty of players hitting free agency, a lot of holes to fix that. I think this roster obviously is still a work in progress. Not all the needs have been fixed. There's still some glaring weaknesses on this roster, but I think that to set the tone for what's going to come later, I think the offseason makes sense. Again, there are some things I would have done differently. I think that, they didn't do as much as they should have in terms of the wide receiver position. But with all that said, I think that this offseason, like you mentioned, it's more of a punt year. And it's not them. I don't think this is them actively tanking or any means. I think this is more of them just saying, all right, we're probably not going to be all that good this year. We can add some guys to get a little bit better, but there's no use in bringing in these super expensive contracts when we know it's not going to do much for us. We want to set things up for the future. We want to be able to succeed down the stretch where we have more opportunities to add top tier talent.
I know you know the number. How much cap space do they have in 2023?
2023. So it's an absurd amount.
I think it's like 130 million, something like that. I don't know if I'm in La La Land here, but I think it's something like that. No?
Yeah. So as I'm frantically for the exact number, Spot Track has the Bears with the most cap space in the NFL next year with $96.7 million. And
that's before cuts and stuff. They can still add more to that, right? There's so much more they can do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And if I'm sure it might be different at Over the Cap because it varies. Okay, so it's 96.9. So just very minimal difference, but it's still a massive amount of cap space. And you have the potential, maybe you could dump Robert Quinn. I know he's a really good football player, and I think that his trade value is never going to be higher than it is right now. If the Bears truly want to move on and they like Trevis Gibson, they like Dominique Robinson, or they have an opportunity to add someone early in the draft, I could see them trying to flip him. Uh, there aren't a ton of contracts that are like, wow, we can cut him to free up a lot of space, but that's because they did a lot of that this offseason. They dumped a lot of people this offseason, freeing Khalil Mack off the books. They ate a lot of dead cap this year, but next year they're going to have a lot more cap space. Same with, like an Eddie Goldman, Danny Trevathan, players like that. You're eating this dead cap now, and down the stretch, you're going to have a lot more money to work with. So I'm really, really excited to see what's going to happen next offseason. I think that, a lot of needs, but I think that they're going to have all the resources to do so. And they're finally going to have a first-round pick, and it's probably going to be really high. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Okay, one more quick question for you. So I've been going through rosters. Like I said, I've been doing like positional rankings and stuff.
Yeah.
And I can only put the Atlanta Falcons roster below the Chicago Bears right now. Where do the Bears pick next year? Where do you think this team ends up? How does this season unfold? Because I'll be honest with you, I have a soft spot for the Bears, so this is not me just like poo-pooing them.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot to work with here. Like it's their best player is Justin Fields, and you can maybe argue Robert Quinn if you want, but like their best player is a second-year quarterback who doesn't have a lot to work with. So, Jacob, where is this football team land next year? What are Bears fans going to go through this year?
So I think that it's definitely going to end up with a top 10 pick. I think that's realistic. Top 5 potentially. I don't know for sure. I think that there are going to be some times where, maybe they're able to flip some of their easy games, and they have an easier schedule than they did last year. So I think it's possible they reach, that 6-win mark. That's around where I have them. And, if that's the case, then I think they just narrowly escape the top 5. I don't think it's going to be early enough for them to end up with, or to get in that thought of, all right, Justin Fields didn't have a great year. We could get CJ Stroud. We could get Bryce Young. I don't think they're going to be early enough to be in the range for those guys. But I do think that they're going to be in the range to get an elite, blue chip prospect elsewhere, whether that's
Will Anderson.
It's Will Anderson.
I know you've been watching Will Anderson tape already.
I mean, and as much as I'd love, like a wide receiver like a Jackson Smith and Jigba or a Kayshon Boutte or Jordan Addison, any of those guys, Will Anderson, I think, is the best player overall in this class from what I've seen. So I certainly wouldn't complain with him rushing the passer for my Chicago Bears. But yeah, I think that it's going to be a top 10 pick, at least in my opinion. I don't think this is a playoff team. I've seen some people, they're like, oh, with this easy schedule, I think they could flip 10, 11 wins, which I don't get that at all. Truthfully, I think that this is a roster with a lot of holes, a lot of deficits. So I'm hopeful for the future. I think 2023, they'll have a legit chance to be a playoff team. But 2022, this is, again, more of a punt year. I think that this is going to be one of the worst teams in the league. I don't think they'll be the worst, because I think that the coaching that they have in place is better than some other places. But I think that it's going to be near the bottom of the barrel.
That is Jacob Infante. He's a writer for Windy City Gridiron. That is the SB Nation hub for the Chicago Bears. Jacob, why don't you plug in anything you want the listeners to take a look at before you go?
Yeah, for sure. So you can check me out on Twitter at Jacob Infante 24. I mean, it's right there, below my name. Check me out at Windy City Gridiron. Like I mentioned, that's where all my Bears stuff is, some of my draft stuff, but also doing NFL draft work over at the Draft Wire. With this year's class dying down a little bit, maybe not as much over the summer, but I'll be digging into some 2023 stuff going forward. And I have a Patreon that's you can make sure to subscribe to. It has my draft guide from this year. So, even though the draft's already been made, you get free access to that and to see what I thought of certain players and what I expect them to be. And I'm going to be having some exclusive stuff down the stretch this summer. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's honestly it. That's where y'all can find me.
Jacob, thanks so much for doing this, man. Really appreciate it.
No, of course. Thank you for having me.